My name is Lenora Vale, 34 years old. The room smelled like lilies and furniture polish, the kind of sweetness that makes grief feel staged. I had chosen the smallest chapel because I thought fewer eyes would hurt less, but our town multiplies rumors faster than compassion, and the rows filled until people stood along the walls like witnesses waiting for a verdict. The casket was white because Tommy liked marshmallows, and I told myself the satin lining looked soft even though I knew how cold his skin had been when I kissed his forehead goodbye. I had placed white roses on the casket, too many, too careful, trying to build a wall of fragrance between my boy and the world that failed him. My father, Ben, hovered close enough to catch me if I tipped, his electrician's hands steady except for the smallest tremor that made me want to hold them the way I used to hold Tommy's when we crossed streets. My daughter Penny, all ribbons and fierce attention, pressed her shoulder to my hip. She had insisted on the purple ribbons because purple was Tommy's favorite color. I let her because some small things should still be allowed in a day that took everything else. Pastor Williams spoke like he was carrying glass in his mouth. Gentle, careful, no sudden moves. He told a story about Tommy bringing his hamster to school in a lunchbox because Mr. Whiskers wanted to learn math. People laughed the kind of laugh that leaks, not rings. I watched Derek, 2 rows back, tilt his head in a small scoff he thought the room didn't hear. He always hated whimsy unless it got him applause. "Your daddy will be nice today, right?" Penny whispered, as if niceness could be ordered like flowers. "Today is about Tommy," I said, smoothing her hair with a clip my mother had worn at my wedding. "Everyone will be on their best behavior." Even Marlene, Derek's mother, was dressed like an accusation, her black perfect as if grief had a dress code. She had a way of speaking in generalities that sliced. Some mothers choose career over children. Some mothers confuse independence with neglect. She never said my name, but she looked at me the way you watch a stain that refuses to lift. Derek arrived late, his suit sharp enough to cut. The bourbon on his breath carried like a second cologne, warm and ugly. He made a performance of solemnity as he walked the aisle, chin set, shoulders squared, the man who had been failed by the courts, the coach who gave back, the neighbor who leaf blew everyone's lawns the day after a storm. The men at the community center loved him. None of them smelled his breath. None of them heard the ice in his voice when he was certain a door had shut. When it was time for a final viewing, I moved first, kissed my boy's cold temple, tucked Chomper, the green T-Rex, along his shoulder the way Tommy liked when nightmares came. "See you later," I said, because my father told me goodbye is for endings, and my son deserved a comma, not a period. Then I stepped aside for Derek. "Move," he said without looking at me. Penny's fingers tightened around mine until my bones hummed. Derek stood over the casket for a long moment, and later, some would say, they thought he was praying. I watched the muscles in his jaw harden like a fist. He leaned in and gathered spit the way a person gathers himself before a speech, then let it fall with violent precision onto the white satin beside our boy's face. The sound was wet and savage. Gasps scattered like spilled beads. I felt something fundamental in me shut a door. "You did this," Derek announced, pivoting to face the room as if he'd been waiting for a stage. If the court had listened, if he lived with me, my son would be alive. He pointed, an indictment made with a shaking hand. She chose her job over her child. She pawned him off on babysitters and her father. This is on her, every bit of it. Whispers rose like steam. A cousin nodded. Someone's husband leaned in to murmur. Even among my people, I caught sideways eyes, the ones that wonder if a woman's competence at work is a deficit at home. Marlene stood, dabbing dry eyes. "My grandson needed stability," she said, voice lined with righteousness. Not a mother who rearranged shifts and expected the children to rearrange feelings. She never mentioned that I had switched to days 6 months earlier for them. Righteousness doesn't like footnotes. "Sit down," my father told me when I started to stand. "He wants a scene." He placed himself quietly between Derek and us, an old wall that still held. Pastor Williams tried to move forward, tried to gather the day back into ceremony, but grief had turned primitive. Derek's lawyer friend, Martin, farther back, lifted his phone as if checking messages. His gaze was a laser that skittered from Derek to me to the funeral director, calculating. I noticed Mrs. Henley by the rear door, the neighbor Derek feuded with over a fence line. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a moment to matter. Penny stood. She was so small behind the front pew that for a second I thought the room might not notice, but she cleared her throat like a bell. "Daddy," she said, and the word carried. "Should I tell everyone what you did to Tommy the night before he died?" Silence sealed the air. Even the tick of the thermostat sounded like a drum. "Penny, sit down." Derek's voice reared up, and the cords in his neck drew taut the way they did before drywall cracked. "No," she said louder. Her hands were fists, but her chin did not tremble. "You're lying. Tommy didn't call you crying. You called us. Thursday night, at 7:43. You were mad because Mommy wouldn't switch weekends. You said you wanted us at the lake, and you called Tommy a baby for wanting to stay home for his science fair." "Sweetheart," Marlene cooed, as if syrup could dissolve truth. "You're confused. It's a hard day." "I'm not confused." Penny's voice was firmer now, a line drawn. "I remember everything. I have a really good memory." She glanced at me, then back at the room. "You told him real boys pick fun over homework. You said Mommy was making him weak." "Enough!" Derek snapped, taking a half step like he might close the distance on a child at her brother's funeral. My father stepped between them and without raising his voice said, "One more step finds you on the floor." The funeral director hovered, hands fluttering like unsettled birds. Pastor Williams's lips moved soundlessly. Phones glinted like eyes in the back rows. Penny moved into the aisle where everyone could see her. She did not look at me, because courage is a forward-facing act. "The night before Tommy died, Daddy made him sleep outside in his underwear," she said. "It was 40 degrees. The tablet said there was a freeze warning. I tried to sneak him a blanket through his window. Daddy took it away and said I was making him soft. He said if I helped again, I'd be next." Marlene's hand rose to her chest. A woman in the back cried openly. Martin, the lawyer friend, was typing like he could outrun a train with a text. "She's been coached," Derek said, but his voice was a smaller thing now, like a match struck in the wind. "This is what her mother does," fills her head. "I don't lie," Penny said. "Tommy told me not to lie. Mommy told him to tell the truth even when it's hard." She took a breath. "I took pictures and videos. On the tablet Daddy gave me at Christmas, the pink one with the unicorn case. Tommy's lips were blue. He threw up in the bushes. Mrs. Henley saw. I showed her." All eyes snapped to the rear. Mrs. Henley lifted her phone like a lantern. "She did," she said, voice shaking with something that sounded like relief. "She came to my door at 6 a.m. I recorded him yelling through the door." She didn't say who him was. She didn't have to. Stillness returned, thicker now, like the air before a storm hammers a field flat. The room felt suddenly too crowded with things we could no longer pretend we didn't know. Outside, faint and far, a siren began to rise, thin as a wire pulled tight. Penny looked at Derek and asked softly, "Should I tell them what happened when Tommy tried to climb the tree to get back inside?" She turned to the room. "I can prove it." The siren's wire tightened beyond the walls, and for one clean second, the entire town held its breath. The siren threaded closer, thin and insistent, and the chapel felt like a jar someone had just sealed, every breath trapped and counted. People will tell you a life breaks in one moment, a single snap clean as a twig. It isn't true. It breaks along old fracture lines, under small pressures you convinced yourself were nothing. The custody order was neat on paper, primary with me, alternate weekends with him, but paper can't factor in ego, performance, or the heat of a man who needs a room to admire him. Derek cultivated admiration the way other people cultivate tomatoes, row by row, predictable and plentiful. He coached youth football with a voice that found microphones without trying. He volunteered at the community center, posted photos of pancake breakfasts with captions about showing up for the kids. He was the dad who built a treehouse and made sure every neighbor saw him hammer the last nail at sunset. What the paper didn't quantify were the recalibrations, the explanations. "He's just stressed," became an old potholder I used to grab hot truths. The hole in the drywall, the scream at the t-ball coach, the time Penny came home with bruises, playground fall, he said. And how do you disprove that when a 7-year-old still thinks gravity is a suggestion? The judge noted a temper, but found nothing documented enough to curtail weekends. Documentation is a god for men who know how to smile for cameras. The weekend that swallowed my son started with a phone call. Thursday, 7:43 p.m. The time stamped on our living room clock, the way guilt stamps itself on a mother's sternum. I was rinsing broccoli. Penny was watching the time because her show started at 8. Tommy stood at the table with baking soda and vinegar open, rehearsing how he'd explain non-Newtonian fluids for the fair. The phone shivered across the counter and lit up with Derek's name. I turned the faucet off. I wanted to let it ring out. I didn't. Not answering him always cost something later. Swap weekends, he said by way of greeting. Jake's lake house is free. The kids want to go. You want to go, I said. The kids want to go, he repeated, louder, like volume could change the truth's outfit. Don't make them miss a good time over one little science thing. Tommy's worked on this all month. Then he can show it to Mrs. Pinterest later, Derek said, and laughed in that way men laugh when they want to make you complicit in a small cruelty. Real boys pick fun over homework. Ask him. Tommy's eyes had widened at real boys, because identity is a switch children are forever being taught to flip. I want to do the fair, he said, voice a careful whisper. Don't be a baby, Derek said into the phone, and a mother can hear a child flinch even when there's a wall between the words and the ears. I told him no. I told him we'd keep the schedule. Derek ended the call with, "You're making him soft," and then, lighter, the tone he used on referees and neighbors. See you Friday. Friday. They left our house with packed backpacks and half a batch of test volcano foam in a mason jar because Tommy wanted to show his dad how high it shot. Penny blew me a kiss from the car window. Derek didn't meet my eyes when I handed him the folder with contact numbers, the kind of mutual courtesy you keep performing long after the respect is dead. On Saturday morning, I woke early with a stone on my chest and no reason my body would admit to. I texted Derek a simple, "All good?" He didn't answer. When the text went from delivered to seen an hour later, I told myself he was busy cooking pancakes, the way he always claimed he did. At noon, our neighbor Amy sent a link to a group chat, photos from the community center posted by the director. Derek wasn't in them. I refreshed the post until the screen felt hot under my thumb. I called. No answer. I called again. No answer. People will tell you this is hindsight, that you're narrativizing an ordinary anxiety. Maybe. But somewhere in my body, a record needle had already hit the groove where the siren would spin forever. Back in the chapel, the siren arrived with uniforms. The funeral director's face arranged itself into procedures. Mrs. Henley was already moving toward the officers, her voice hushed but urgent, the phone in her hand as bright and damning as a flare. She said Penny had come to her door at 6 that morning with the pink tablet. She said she'd recorded the voice that told a freezing boy he could come inside when he stopped acting like a little. She stopped herself, looking at my daughter, as if the room could be spared one more bruise if we trimmed a syllable. "Ma'am," one of the officers said to me, voice pitched to gentle, "we'll need to ask you some questions." Gentle as an anesthesia mask. Derek started to talk. Half outrage, half legalese, but Martin, the lawyer friend, had stopped typing and begun whispering for him to keep quiet. When a man like Derek goes silent on someone else's advice, you can hear the arithmetic of self-preservation clicking in his skull. There is a particular stillness when strangers in uniform step into a ritual. The flowers don't smell like flowers anymore. They smell like the idea of flowers in a room where truth is about to find a microphone. It didn't happen fast the way I thought arrests always did. It happened in small pauses. A phone handed to a gloved hand, a nod, a second officer stepping to the side to radio, the funeral director explaining the room capacity like that mattered now, the pastor closing his Bible but not stepping away from the pulpit. Someone started crying softly and didn't stop. Someone else whispered, "This can't be happening," over and over like a charm. They asked Penny to sit. She didn't. She stood near me, her body angled like a compass needle finding north. When the officer asked if she had more to show them, she said, "Mrs. Henley kept the tablet safe. Daddy deletes things." No one corrected the present tense. The room tasted like metal. "Sir," an officer said to Derek, "we're going to step outside and talk." "I'm not leaving my son," he said, and I believed that sentence for exactly the space of the breath before he added, "with her," and pointed at me again, as if the gesture could summon back the theater he controlled. The officers did what procedure requires. They didn't yank. They didn't bark. They stood close enough to be the walls he could not push through and explain the phrases, probable cause, evidence in hand, step this way, as if those sounds were not detonations. He looked around the room for rescue and found only phones. When he realized no one was going to save him, his face did a thing I had seen once, years ago, when a storm had taken down the power during his birthday and the lights didn't come back when he barked the order for them to. He tried swagger first. "This is a funeral. You animals." Then indignation, the good man's mask. "She's orchestrating this." When neither bought him the exit, rage split and curdled into a fear that looked, for a hairline second, like a boy's. They led him up the aisle past his mother, who reached for him and stopped, hand hovering midair as though it had discovered distance is sometimes a moral fact, not a physical one. "Tell me she's lying," she whispered, but it wasn't a question. He didn't answer. His eyes caught mine the way a hook catches skin. If I'd had any air left, I might have felt triumph. I didn't. My lungs were busy holding the building up. Outside, for a beat, the world insisted on continuing. A car door thunked, a gull complained in the cold, some poor delivery kid jogged past with a bouquet meant for a different room. They put Derek's hands behind his back. A man who curated admiration suddenly had nowhere to put his hands. The click of the cuffs was a precise, unhungry sound. Phones rose like a field of thin arms. The town would watch this again over dinner and decide where it had stood. Marlene made a sound that split in the middle and fell apart. My father caught her elbow and put her into a chair because decency is a muscle he has exercised even on people who never returned it. Pastor Williams prayed under his breath. Mr. Garrett, the funeral director, blinked fast and then fastened his professionalism back on with both hands because the dead still needed tending and the living were about to be interviewed. When I stepped out into the air, I expected it to feel new. It didn't. It felt thinner, like the atmosphere had learned its own limits. Derek stood against the car, cuffed, cheeks blotched with a red that didn't read as shame yet, just fury deprived of its favorite toys. He looked at me like the person who broke his favorite mirror. I thought of the word accident and the way we had said it to ourselves like a lullaby. Accident, accident, accident. How many times had language let harm live in our house with its shoes on? An officer asked if I had someone who could take Penny home. I looked at my father. He nodded once. "I'll get her settled," he said. "Then I'll come back." Penny didn't want to leave, and I understood. Children want to see the end of the trick so they can sleep. I crouched to meet her eyes. "You did the bravest thing I've ever seen," I said. She pressed her lips together like a little soldier, trying not to cry, and whispered, "He told Tommy crying is for babies." "Crying is for people," I said. "We are people." Behind us, Mrs. Henley was already giving her statement with the carefulness of someone who had anticipated not being believed. She had copied files to 3 places, she told them, and time-stamped a note she placed in her freezer just in case because she had read somewhere that paper preserved cold can be authenticated. A woman becomes an archivist when her neighborhood trains her. That proof is the only language that counts. They read Derek his rights. He watched the officer's mouth like he might memorize the words for later and use them as keys. When they put him in the back of the car, he twisted once, as if checking whether anyone he respected was watching. Only phones. Only us. Only the sky with no opinion. The door shut with a soft thud. It sounded like a lid. I thought I would feel lighter. I didn't. I shook the way scaffolding shakes when a truck passes, still upright, but every bolt reminded of its job. Inside the chapel, my son was waiting for the part of the day where we promised him, "See you later." Outside, my daughter was learning that truth had a bodyguard when people decided to become one. Somewhere between those doors, I realized that even the right person in handcuffs does not rewind a single second. It just stops the clock from breaking other rooms. I stood there long enough for the air to hurt my teeth, and then I went back inside to sit beside my boy and hold the dinosaur like a relic. The officers would be back with questions. The town would be back with opinions. For the first time in 5 days, the word accident refused to enter the room. The next morning began in a courtroom, not a chapel. The same faces that had filled pews now filled benches, whispers replaced hymns, and truth became an exhibit number. When the judge read the charges, involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment, the words landed like stones dropped into still water. Each one rippled outward, touching every person who had once called Derek a good man. I sat behind the prosecution table, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stand the idea of him turning around and not seeing what he'd destroyed. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ceiling, the floor, the papers, anywhere but at me. Penny sat between my father and Mrs. Henley, her small legs not quite reaching the floor. She wore Tommy's purple ribbon on her wrist, like courage she could tie on and off. The first day was procedure, charges, bail, the shuffle of authority. But by day 3, the evidence began to breathe. The prosecutor laid out a timeline so precise it could have been a metronome. Thursday, 7:43 p.m., the phone call. Friday, 8:30 p.m., temperature drops to 40 degrees. Saturday, 2:03 a.m. The neighbor's motion-activated camera records movement in Derek's backyard. 6:02 a.m. Penny knocks on Mrs. Henley's door, holding a tablet. Then came the photos. The screen dimmed, and the courtroom lights seemed to fade with it. On the monitor appeared the image of my son, barefoot, trembling, skin ghost pale against the dark yard. The timestamp glowed in the corner. His breath had fogged the camera. He was wearing his Spider-Man underwear. You could see the freeze warning icon at the top of the screen. Someone in the back row began to cry. Another person whispered, "Oh my God." The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes like winter glass, didn't blink. She just nodded once and said softly, "Continue." The next image was worse. Tommy standing near the oak tree, looking up. The bark was slick with frost. The last video was sound only. The rustle of leaves, a small voice saying, "Mommy?" And then a heavy thud. That sound became the evidence no one could unhear. When the coroner took the stand, his words stripped away the last shred of the accident narrative. "Blunt force trauma from a fall," he said, "but secondary cause, hypothermia." The child had been outside for over 4 hours before attempting to climb back into the house. His fingernails were torn. The scratches on his abdomen matched the dog door's metal edge. The jury flinched as if each word were a lash. Then came Mrs. Henley. She testified calmly, every detail anchored to time. "I heard yelling," she said. "I stepped onto my porch and saw a light on in the living room. I heard him shout, 'Real men don't cry.' I recognized his voice. It wasn't the voice he used at the neighborhood barbecues." The defense tried to shake her. They suggested her memory might be colored by community bias. She looked straight at the attorney and said, "I know the difference between a memory and a nightmare. This was both." Penny was the last to testify. She walked to the stand holding Chomper, Tommy's dinosaur, tucked under her arm. The courtroom rose as she approached, though no one was told to. Maybe reverence isn't something a judge has to command. The prosecutor crouched to her level. "Penny," she said, "can you tell us why you took those pictures?" Penny's voice was soft but sure, "Because no one believed me before. Grown-ups need proof." When the defense attorney asked, "Did your mother tell you what to say today?" she shook her head. "No. Mommy told me to tell the truth, even if it hurts." Then she looked at Derek. No tears, no fear, just a 7-year-old with the clarity of a sunrise, and said, "You told Tommy that crying is for babies, but you're crying now, Daddy." And he was. For the first time, Derek's composure fractured. His hands shook so badly the cuffs at his wrists clinked like wind chimes. His mother, Marlene, sobbed openly. When she took the stand the next day, her voice broke in half. "I believed him," she said. "I believed my son because I needed to. Because it was easier than believing he was capable of this." She turned to me. "I'm so sorry, Lenora. I told people you were cold, but I was the one who froze." The courtroom fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Even the reporters had stopped typing. The judge nodded slowly, as if she had seen this scene before. Love turned blind, then turned deadly. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor spoke not with fire, but with quiet precision. "This case is not about rage," she said. "It's about control, about a man who confused fear with respect and discipline with love, and about a child who believed love meant survival." The defense asked for leniency, called it discipline gone wrong, said he only wanted to make his son strong. But the videos stripped those words of oxygen. The judge watched the final clip again, Derek standing over his son, calling him weak. And when she looked up, her expression was carved from stone. Her verdict was deliberate, every syllable hammered like truth into iron. Guilty on all counts. Derek didn't move. The bailiff stepped forward, but he didn't resist. For the first time in years, he seemed small. Like the idea of himself had finally deflated. 12 years. That's what he got. 12 years that would never equal one night of my son's life. When the gavel struck, it didn't sound like justice. It sounded like finality. After the verdict, people spoke to me in hushed voices in the hallway. Neighbors, co-workers, even the judge's clerk. "You were brave," they said. "Your daughter's a hero." But bravery doesn't feel like victory. It feels like exhaustion that never quite leaves your bones. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, and someone asked, "Do you have anything to say?" I did, but not for them. I turned to Penny, crouched down, and whispered, "We did it, baby. Tommy can rest now." She looked up at me, clutching Chomper. "Can we go home?" "Yes," I said, "we can finally go home." That night, the house was silent, except for the hum of the heater. Penny fell asleep on the couch holding the dinosaur, her ribbon slipping down her wrist. I stood at the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, my son was free from the cold, but inside me, the frost still hadn't melted. Justice had been served, but peace. Peace was another kind of trial. The trial was over, but life after truth doesn't return to what it was before. It becomes something quieter, heavier, like walking through a house after a storm and realizing the walls still stand, but the air will never sound the same again. 6 months had passed since the verdict. Derek's face still appeared on local news updates whenever the anchors needed a cautionary headline. Former youth coach sentenced to 12 years for child endangerment. The words sounded sterile on television, neat, finite, but the echoes inside our home were anything but. Our mornings became a patchwork of small rituals stitched together from memory. Penny would sit at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal and Chomper propped against her juice glass. "Good morning, Tommy," she'd whisper before taking her first bite. Some days she smiled. Other days she didn't. I never forced it either way. Healing, I learned, doesn't move in straight lines. It circles, revisits, loops back when you least expect it. The science fair volcano sat on the mantel. My father had rewired the mechanism so it still erupted perfectly, bright foam spilling down the sides in slow, theatrical motion. Once a week, we'd let it bubble, and Penny would clap while I whispered, "Look, baby, it works." Every time it erupted, the noise filled the room the way laughter used to, reminding us that some creations survive even when their creators don't. We attended therapy every Thursday. Dr. Albright was patient, gentle, the kind of woman who didn't flinch when silence stretched too long. Penny would draw pictures, sometimes of trees, sometimes of houses with too many doors locked, and Dr. Albright would nod thoughtfully, saying, "That's a brave drawing." I learned to stop translating bravery as strength. Sometimes bravery was just telling the truth out loud, even when your voice shook. Marlene came once, months after sentencing. She stood on my porch holding a pie she hadn't baked herself. Her hair was thinner, her eyes red around the edges. "I won't stay," she said. "I just wanted to say I was wrong, about you, about everything." I wanted to hate her, but grief doesn't leave room for more poison. "You can visit Penny if you want," I said finally. "But not yet. She's still finding her footing." Marlene nodded. "Tell her I'm proud of her," she whispered, then added, "Tell her I love Tommy too. I just didn't know how to love right." When she left, she placed the pie on the porch rail and walked away without looking back. The pie stayed there until nightfall, and then the wind took the foil. I didn't chase it. Some apologies aren't meant to be kept. Derek wrote letters from prison. The first one came 2 months after the trial. The envelope was thin, the handwriting unfamiliar, small, hesitant. "Lenora, I dream about Tommy. I dream he forgave me. I know I don't deserve it." I didn't reply. The second letter began, "Tell Penny I'm sorry. I burned that one in the sink." Penny didn't need ghosts trying to rewrite their hauntings. But part of me wondered if Tommy would have wanted forgiveness for his father, if mercy was something children understood better than adults. I left that question on the mantel, beside the volcano, and let it stay unanswered. The community changed in ways I hadn't expected. 3 families came forward during the trial, their sons' stories almost identical. Coach Morrison made us toughen up. The same phrases, The same bruises covered with jokes. Each parent admitted they'd dismissed it as strictness, as boys being boys. In court, one of them cried so hard he had to be escorted out. They sent flowers later. I didn't respond, but I appreciated the gesture. Truth had ripples, and at least this one was pulling other children to safety. By fall, Penny started speaking at school assemblies about courage and kindness. The first time she did it, I watched from the back row. She stood behind the podium, her hair in a single braid, voice calm and certain. "When something feels wrong," she said, "don't stay quiet just because the person is bigger than you. Even grown-ups can be wrong, even people you love." Her classmates listened, wide-eyed. I thought of Tommy, of how proud he would have been. Afterward, she told me she wasn't nervous. "I just pretended everyone was Mr. Whiskers," she said, referring to Tommy's hamster. I laughed for the first time in months. Some nights, though, the silence still presses in. I'll find myself standing in Tommy's room, hand tracing the curve of the bedpost, the smell of his apple shampoo faint but persistent. Grief sneaks in like that, through memory's smallest cracks. Dr. Albright once told me, "You don't move on from grief, you move forward with it." I didn't understand then. I do now. Grief is the echo you learn to walk beside. One evening, Penny and I drove to the lake, the same lake Derek had begged to take them to. The air was cool, the water still, the reflections of the trees perfect enough to feel sacred. Penny tossed a handful of purple petals into the water. "For Tommy," she said, "so he can have his science fair in heaven." I smiled, blinking back tears. "He'll love that," I whispered. We sat there until the sky turned gold, until the first fireflies appeared, small floating lights between this world and the next. As we got up to leave, Penny asked, "Mom, do you think Tommy's proud of me?" I knelt, brushing her hair back from her face. "I think he's proud of both of us," I said. "You were his hero when he needed one, and now you're mine." She hugged me tightly, and for a long moment, I let the warmth replace the cold. Back home, we lit a candle beneath Tommy's photo, the one of us at the beach, building sandcastles, sunlight spilling across our faces. Next to it, the volcano waited. I poured in the mixture, and together we counted down. 3, Penny whispered. 2, 1. The volcano erupted, red foam spilling over like joy rediscovered. We laughed, both of us, the sound sharp and real. I thought of what I'd told the world once, standing in that funeral home, that sometimes the smallest voice in the room becomes the most powerful. I believed it then. I know it now. The truth didn't set us free. It just made sure the right person was no longer holding the key. But freedom, I've learned, isn't always about open doors. It's about knowing you'll never lock them again. As the foam bubbled and hissed, Penny whispered, "Good night, Tommy." And I said it too. "Good night, my boy." The candle flickered, the volcano glowed, and for the first time, peace didn't feel impossible.